Okay, this is going to be our next activity. We're going to work with some bearings. We have some bearing housings over here. We have bearing shafts. And then, of course, we have some bearings. And there are several different types of bearings here. We're going to go through each one of these in this series. But we're also going to talk about some special tools, some drivers, some other things with each one of these types of bearings. Also, when we take a look at this here, we have a special type of nut on here. We're going to talk about the tools specifically associated with that as we go through. The very first thing that we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about plain bearings. Okay, so I'm going to set you down right over here so that I can adjust this and then get us into a place to where we can talk about this and get it through. Now, plain bearing, okay, is simply this. Doesn't look very fancy. Oftentimes when we think about a bearing, we think about a ball bearing, which you can see the balls inside of here. Not all ones that you can, but again, this right here is the first and most basic type of bearing. It essentially uses the material itself to provide a slick surface for a shaft to ride inside of a housing. So the first thing we're going to feel here to where this slips on, it's like, okay, well, it slips, it moves very easily. And now let's go ahead and make this a meaningful assembly. And what I mean by that is we're going to put it in a housing, something that holds this bearing so that when the shaft goes through, there is some support, okay? Because that's the configuration you're generally going to see. So what we're going to want to do is we want to start by setting our bearing inside of the housing gently, all right? Don't want to put a lot of force. We do want to make sure that we use a square here to make sure that it's sitting reasonably straight, which it is. And then we're going to use our arbor press right here. We're going to open this thing up. We're going to rotate this around to where we have the wide section here for this particular job. And then we're going to move this down into place, making sure that the whole anvil covers it. And then we are going to slide with our handle here. We're going to slide the bearing down into place. Okay, so that right there is a typical bearing installation. But interesting to note, though, is that after I put that in, okay, I'm getting a little bit different feeling for how the shaft rides inside of this in this bearing. And generally, it's because there is an interference fit here, and it's actually shrinking that just a little bit. So take notice of that. Put this together and feel kind of the difference between when you had it out and when you had it in. Now, let's go ahead and show a different thing. So let's say that you don't have an arbor press. We're going to use this mandrel right here. We're going to go ahead and get rid of this guy and get it out. Okay. The other way to actually install is very similar to what you just got done seeing for this. But in this case here, what we're going to do is we're going to set this up in and try to get it reasonably straight. Oftentimes there's a lead to help us get those things in. And then we're going to check with a square. Look at that. That thing was crooked. And now it's actually looking pretty straight. And this is looking fairly straight. And if we notice that it's a little bit off, sometimes you can move it with your fingers. If you can't, you can just kind of tap it lightly side to side. We want to really use a lot of caution when starting a bearing, because if we get it cocked and we start driving it down in, it's going to cause some damage. It could change the shape of the bearing, or it can shave some material off. But essentially, as flat as we possibly can, we can tap on this. Also, too, we can use our mandrel, and that center, this part right here, locates that in there, and then it actually pushes off of the shoulder. So we can use this to kind of tap it. It is a good idea to take a peek after a few whacks there to just see and make sure that it is lined up perfectly. And now we have it flush there. Okay, now I'm going to assemble this back in. Okay, it feels okay. Oftentimes, if you end up having to put a little too much force on these things, this mandrel can actually damage this surface in here and cause it to, they call mushroom over, essentially just kind of take the edge material and put it into the bore, and then you can't get your shaft in there, okay? And then, of course, if we want to take this out, we're going to have to find a place to be able to take this out if we want to use the hammer to do so. And you could use a vise like we have back over here, just opened up, the jaws opened up far enough out this way, using this mandrel to go ahead and tap this all the way through. This could be suitable. It's a little bit far, and it's a very slick surface, but essentially you could use this to go ahead and tap back through. But because we have this, I'm going to go ahead and uninstall this portion. All right, looks like we have a little bit of a hiccup there. I'm going to go ahead and turn that around. I was feeling that it was a bit much force for this, so I don't want to force it if I don't have to. And there, that's so much better. All right, so that right there is a quick introduction to the bearings and pressing a bearing sleeve together and knowing what to expect. Again, a couple other types there. So we have this shouldered bearing, and that's good to realize what this is and why you would use it. This right here is actually, it would go in the housing, and when it goes up against this, it can help with the actual axial loads as well as the radial loads. Okay, so not all bearings are created equal, even in a plain bearing. So this right here is just going to give you the radial load. This will give you a radial load and an axial load. And then of course there is this bearing over here. All right, it looks just like a washer. Well, it is, but it is a thrust bearing, and it is just going to work with the axial load. So again, just understanding what each one of these does and how they generally are installed.